Humanist Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following a few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Humanist Perspective. I'm Jim Dugan, the Vice President of the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association. I'll be your host for this evening. Our guest this evening is Mr. Bart Everson, who is a writer, an artist, and an activist, a teacher, a baker of bread in copious quantities, and a husband and father. His formative years were in Indiana and northern Sweden, and he has lived in New Orleans since 1999. He's a co-creator of ROX, the first TV show on the internet, a founding member of the Green Party of Louisiana, a founder and past president of Friends of Lafitte Greenway, and a participant in New Orleans Lamplight Circle. I hope we'll talk about that a little bit. He writes a column for Mid-City Messenger and Humanistic Paganism. More information is available at barteverson.com. Bart has an interest in, among other things, in how secular humanists mark time, how we who don't have churches find ways of celebrating the turning of the seasons and connecting with friends and family. In fact, he's written a whole book about it called Spinning in Place. A secular humanist embraces the neo-pagan wheel of the year. And so that tells us right away that your particular choice for marking the turning of the seasons and building these kinds of rituals and family and community connections has been based on the Celtic and Germanic roots that we see in neo-paganism. How did you wander into that?
Well, it's kind of a strange story. After my daughter was born about 8 years ago, I kind of was on a little bit of a spiritual quest, just thinking about how she was going to be raised and so forth, and kind of revisiting a lot of the questions that I had kind of thought were kind of settled for me, and just kind of exploring around. Part of that was that we had named our daughter after an ancient Greek goddess, and that got me kind of thinking about the fact, or investigating a little bit about some people who are kind of reinventing ancient goddess worship in the modern context. I just found that very intriguing, and that led me to learn more about Wicca and paganism and so forth. And I suppose what I found really, what really kept my interest was this idea of nature religion, the idea of a religion that, or a spiritual practice that has the earth at the center, or as the basis of it. So very much focused on this world and our direct experience. And I found that very intriguing and very challenging, really, to all the kind of concepts of what I thought religion and spiritual practice were all about. It kind of spoke to me, and then I discovered this notion of the wheel of the year. There's a cycle of seasonal celebrations. A lot of people have heard of the solstices and the equinoxes, although a lot of Americans would be challenged to actually define them. But they take place equally spaced throughout the year. So they kind of, if you were to draw a circle and you mark the solstices and equinoxes, they'd be at the 4 points around the circle, equally spaced. And then there are some other holidays that kind of fall halfway in between each one of those. So you have 8 holidays, evenly spaced throughout the year. And I thought that was such a beautiful construct, and it really does come from this, some of these people in Britain in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s who kind of assembled this from ancient traditions. We don't really know for a fact that there was any ancient culture that celebrated all 8 of these holidays.
Right, this is pasted together from different sources.
Exactly, and in some parts of the world, equinoxes are really important. In others, the solstices are important. Some cultures may have celebrated all 4 of those solar holidays, but these cross-quarter days in between were celebrated in the Celtic tradition, but there was no one culture that did all 8 of them. But it has, once they got put together, it kind of has this symmetry and this logical aspect to it that it kind of just seems very natural. And you can imagine that it has always been there, even though that's not really the case. And it just seemed like such a great gift to the world, that this is really something that these holidays really seem like something that are universally available.
And now you've mentioned a couple of points I'd like to focus on in your introduction here. One is, now you've used the word spiritual a number of times, and this is something that secular people always have a little trouble with, because the word spiritual can mean a lot of different things. And so in some people's minds that's kind of ghosts and woo-woo, but you're talking about ceremonies and rituals that are tied to things that we can see and observe here in this world.
Right. And I should clarify, for when I talk about spirituality, to me I'm not talking about another world full of spirits and so forth, but to me it's more like getting in the spirit of something, the emotional or qualitative, the emotional qualities of something, the spirit, to get in, like for example, we just celebrated the summer solstice, and part of that is, to me, the spirit of summer, which is my favorite season, and a lot of people, even in New Orleans, even though we have this sweltering heat, a lot of people do enjoy summer a lot because it reminds them of different things. Maybe it reminds them of when they were a kid and they were out of school. Maybe it's the time to take a trip to the beach. We have longer days, and the sunlight being around for so long, you can stay out late and take walks and enjoy nature a little bit more, perhaps. To me, that's all part of the spirit of summer. But I also feel like there's a connection then with these holidays to ancient traditions. Even though there may not have been one culture that celebrated all 8 of these holidays, each one of them has been celebrated for time immemorial by different cultures around the world. So that anytime you celebrate one of these, you're also connecting to the past of humanity. And there's a lot of resonance there.
There's a romanticism about that is appealing. I'm reminded the roots of the word religion, actually religio means to reconnect, right? To retie. It's finding your roots in a certain sense.
Yeah. So making a connection to something that's bigger than yourself, making a connection to the history of humanity or to the cycles and the rhythms of nature. That's very fulfilling in a way, and kind of makes people feel good and feel positive. To me, that's what spiritual practice is.
And you've mentioned now a couple of times placing nature in the center of this practice, and which probably dovetails with your activism in the Green Party. There's an environmental aspect of this.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've been an environmentalist for a long time, an environmental activist. I found, after I'd left the church in which I had been raised, and I was a young person looking for meaning in life, I found environmental activism to be a very meaningful activity. And I didn't think of it as religious. And in fact, a lot of, or as a spiritual thing. But there's a lot of aspects to it that are very similar. And in fact, a lot of criticism of environmentalists. People will say, well, they're just trying to implement a religion. They're trying to make Mother Earth into their goddess, or something like that. And over the years, eventually, I guess somewhere along the line, I thought, well why not? Why not? What would be so wrong with that? What if we lived in the earth and on the earth in a way that we kind of tried to live with reverence for the natural world? We would try to live in a fashion that was responsible, and where we thought about the implications of our actions, our way of living, not just for us, but also for future generations of humanity and all the other creatures on Earth, all the plants and animals and so forth that we live in. We have a connection with them. It's vital to our own existence, but there's also a lot of value, I feel like, that all life has that's just inherent. Kind of a dignity and respect that we should give it. Well, would it be so bad if that was the kind of, if there was a spiritual aspect to that? And indeed there is. So what I like to say is that my politics went green before my religion did, but eventually my religion caught up.
So what would you do then if you, to come back down out of the theoretical to the applied, there's a solstice or an equinox or a cross-quarter day coming up. How do you mark this time? What do you do that makes it meaningful, that helps you build your community connections?
Well, a lot of different things. So I feel like each one of these holidays has a different aspect and a different character to it. Again, a seasonal character to it. So we're coming up on August, at the beginning of August, this cross-quarter day that's called Lammas. Lammas, which is traditionally regarded as the beginning of the grain harvest, back when a lot of our ancestors would have been more closely tied to the agricultural cycle. That would have made sense, right? And towards that part of summer, times are getting kind of lean, and the beginning of the harvest, to actually begin that process, is pretty important to the community. These days, of course, we're not, most of us are not as intimately connected. We're not out in the fields working. Certainly, we're going to the grocery store and buying stuff. So it's easy to get disconnected from that process, but it's kind of an illusion to think that we're not still subject to these cycles. We are.
Oh, no, we all have to eat, and somebody had to plant that and harvest that at some point.
Right.
And
so,
the longer days and the shorter days affect our body chemistry, our moods, in so many different ways, even though culturally we're kind of insulated from a lot of that, but it still has an impact on us. We can't pretend.
Absolutely. So I like to celebrate Lammas by baking a loaf of bread. In fact, it was from celebrating Lammas that I turned into a baker of bread, and now I kind of bake bread all the time so that my family can have bread to eat. You could say I celebrate Lammas every Sunday now, and bake some bread, and then we eat it, in sandwiches over the course of the week. But for Lammas, I try to, bake something special. I'll try to shape the bread into a figure, maybe a human figure, and then that human figure kind of symbolizes the grain harvest. And when we eat that human figure, it's like we're sacrificing the grain for us, and we recognize the cycle and the kind of reciprocity that's at work there. It's also, of course, the hottest time of the year, beginning of August. So you can consider it kind of an echo of the solstice. The summer solstice is the longest day of the year, but it's not the hottest day. That comes later, about the beginning of August. You can look at the temperature charts and see statistically that it's true. What we also call them the dog days of summer. So it's also a time to think about the kind of the fullness of being, the fullness of nature's cycles here in the Northern Hemisphere. Really, things are coming to fruition there. The ripeness of all these fruits that have been ripening all summer long is really coming to a head. It can be a time then to think about our dissolution into a larger self. And that sounds
Part
kind
of
of
the community,
esoteric.
be part of the web or part of the community.
Yeah, and so I'm always trying to find those connections to something more profound.
And of course, using grain converted into bread as a kind of sacrifice and as standing, even almost in a cannibalistic sense, of standing for a person or a flesh of some kind is pretty universal. I mean, it's embedded in Christianity. I can think of an ancient Aztec practice where they made the idol out of the grain and pulled pieces off of it and shared it out, and everybody ate a bit. This is the kind of thing people have been doing everywhere for thousands of years.
Yeah, exactly. Some of these rituals, we don't. I'd like to point out that our life is full of rituals, and we don't always acknowledge the fact. But for example, when I was first introduced to you, what did we do? We shook hands, right? We shook hands, and people don't think about the fact that that is a ritual, but it has a purpose. We wanted to, it's kind of saying, well, we have a connection, and we can talk now, even though we're complete strangers. We can talk now. We're shaking hands, and that's breaking down the barrier. And in a way, we're trying to manifest the reality that we want to exist through this little action. We're trying to say, that we have a vision of how things could be, and we're going to make it that way by doing this little symbolic action. And those rituals can be really powerful. A lot of the rituals that we just inherit, they're just in our society, and we don't even see them or think about them. But you can get really creative with these rituals. You can come together with your family, with your community, with your neighbors, whatever, and make up something. And then and do that to celebrate whatever you want, whatever it is that you feel needs to be celebrated. And then if you just do it again, especially with something that has an annual recurrence, it starts to take on meaning. It starts to take on a depth of significance just by the simple repetition of it. And I just find that absolutely fascinating.
These rituals always have a big psychological impact. I guess that's just human nature, I think, in some ways. You, of course, have chosen to participate with a group called the Lamplight Circle,
Yes.
which I don't know very much about. Tell us a little bit about that. And they're here in New Orleans.
Yes, New Orleans Lamplight Circle. I first became aware of Lamplight Circle when I opened up the newspaper and saw a photograph of people working in a community garden. And it said that this was a pagan group, New Orleans Lamplight Circle. And I thought, well, that's intriguing. There's pagans in my community. I've been kind of reading about this online, but I didn't really know of a local group. And this is a group that was organized initially and still by a woman named Tahara Siddiqui and Emily Snyder. And there have been a huge number of people locally who've participated because they're very open, and they try to take kind of what you would say very a pagan approach. Paganism in its modern contemporary context is really a very broad, kind of an umbrella term, and there's all kinds of different practitioners under that umbrella. So what Lamplight Circle has offered is just an opportunity for people to connect and kind of learn more about these practices, come together and celebrate these seasonal celebrations with one another.
How would you describe it as more participant-oriented or more, some groups like this are more open to public participation or observation, and some are more private?
Yeah, definitely kind of quasi-public, It's the kind of thing that's open to anybody who is curious about it, but it's not just we're doing a ritual at this place and time, come one, come all. It's not quite like that. It's more like there's a process of application, and then but you don't certainly have to conform to some particular tradition or anything of that nature. So there's a lot of people who are just just curious. They just want to know more interested how this would work out.
And I think there's an important point to be made there, because what you're suggesting, or certainly in your book have suggested, is that people make up their own rituals, things that are meaningful to them. You're not prescribing a specific set of practices. And when you start to get into some groups like that, they might have a little more ready-made. So they might have a certain set of rituals for different times of the year that are a little more specified.
Absolutely. So in some groups would be very specific about we're traditional British Wicca, for example, and we're doing things that way, and and it could be almost, I hate to use the word, but almost a little orthodox, although most people would regard it as highly unorthodox. Nevertheless, in Lamplight Circle, it's been very eclectic and very much about let's try something different. There's so many people involved in the group, so they might, for example, this summer solstice, my daughter, who's 8 years old, hosted the summer solstice ritual for the first time. She's very proud of that, and this was just something that she and I, with a little help from me, kind of invented on her own. So it's not really grounded in any particular authoritative tradition at all. It's just a personal expression. You could think of it as a form of performance art, but a way of expressing our joy at being alive, celebrating the fact that we're here on this planet at this particular point in time, at this particular point in history, and trying to see things in a new way. Maybe by creating your own rituals, you have the opportunity to kind of flip the script. We're always running these mental scripts, in our minds. If you start to pay attention to what's going on mentally, a lot of times we find that the scripts in our minds, they're not always conducive to happiness and healthy living, right? Because it's come out of our evolutionary struggle to exist. So a lot of what's going on internally is centered on survival and kind of some very basic stuff. It's not always what we're aiming for. It's not always the highest and the best and the most ethical and moral aspect of ourselves. But we can design rituals to try to change that, right? We can make a ritual to try to foster things. A spiritual practice, in other words, in order to foster a reverence and a connection to the earth, a reverence and connection to other humans. And this, to my mind, is one of the highest things we could aim for.
As secular humanists, not as
absolutely.
I know there's another group in the area. Just because I've had them on the show, I've had High Priestess and High Priest of the Beehive Coven in Kenner here, and they do much of the same kind of thing. They perform the Sabbats in the cycle. I think they do all 8. And some of them they have on their website, they specifically mark some of them as public. They're a little more open to just observation, although I suppose most of the people there are participating as well.
Right.
So are you aware of specific differences or similarities between the groups? Like I said, I don't know too much about the Lamplight Circle.
Right. No, I wasn't even aware until recently, although I know that they've been around for quite a while. In fact, for Lammas coming up, Lamplight Circle and Beehive Coven are
co-participating,
collaborating, coalescing.
What a great idea!
and so forth. And so I look forward to learning a lot more.
Well, that'll be a new experience for you.
Yes, absolutely.
So I noticed that they have Lammas is coming up, right? That's going to be August 6th.
Right.
I think I'm used to hearing that called Lunasa. That's a little more the Irish version of it, I think. And then in September, do you say Mabon or Mabon?
I say the autumnal equinox.
Okay. That's actually harder, right?
Yes, that's actually one of the most controversial names in terms of the names that are given to these different holidays, different celebrations, because Mabon or Mabon is not a historical name. Nobody ever really called it that back in the day. It was kind of just invented a few decades ago. I think it was Aidan Kelly who came up with that. And so some people use that term, and I've got no problem with it. But other people seem to think that they prefer to call it the autumnal equinox. I like to call the equinoxes and the solstices
Equinoxes
and solstices, just because that's how I first learned about them. That holiday, the equinox, the autumnal equinox in particular, is kind of called sometimes the pagan Thanksgiving.
Right.
And so it's traditional for American neo-pagans, for contemporary pagans, to have a big feast. One thing that, and there's generally an emphasis on gratitude. And so one thing that my family has done for years now is we start a gratitude chain at that time, which is just, we'll just get us a bunch of strips of paper, and then every day when we're sitting down to dinner, usually we'll write something that we're grateful for, something that we're glad about in our lives, and then make that into a chain, a paper chain. And then as the days go on, the chain gets longer and longer, until finally, maybe usually at the winter solstice, we'll throw it in the bonfire.
Oh, so yeah, that's the sacrifice of the chain.
Right.
We are fast running out of time. One or two other little things I'd like to talk about if we have just a moment or two. On October 8th, here in New Orleans at Washington Square, there is something called the Pagan Pride Festival.
Yes.
I went to that a couple years ago for the first time. I didn't even know it existed. And in fact, I got my connection to the Beehive Coven there. Tell us a little bit about Pagan Pride.
Well, so Pagan Pride is a concept that's celebrated, I guess, globally, certainly around the country, as a time to try to get some understanding of the religious diversity that is truly here in the country, that there are really so many people doing so many different things. They might call themselves pagans. Maybe they don't even identify with that term, but they kind of have a lot of pagan friends and so forth. So it's a celebration of religious diversity and religious freedom. That's one of the fundamental bedrocks of American society, right? That a lot of times we fall short, and there's a lot of fear and misunderstanding of people who might call themselves pagan. So this kind of festival then is an opportunity to learn more and see more about how these kind of practices might actually look. And it's a lot of fun, and I would encourage everybody to come out and participate.
Fun. The key word of what you said in my experience at this event was diversity, because there's a little bit of everything. Yeah. There will be pagans, there will be tarot cards and past life regression and music and yoga and chakra cleansing, you name it, there'll be a little bit of that there. October 8th, Washington Square, right here in New Orleans. I hoped we would talk about other things too. Thank you so much, Bart Everson, for being our guest.
It's been my pleasure.